We are expecting at least 2 more hearings from the January 6th committee later this month. But right now, there are new questions about pressure on witnesses from Trump world after committee Vice Chair Liz Cheney said this at Tuesday's hearing about messages to unnamed witnesses and what they received.
What they said to me is, as long as I continue to be a team player, they know I'm on the right team. I'm doing the right thing. I'm protecting who I need to protect. You know I'll continue to stay in good graces in Trump world. A person let me know you have your deposition tomorrow. He wants me to let you know he's thinking about you. He knows you're loyal and you're going to do the right thing when you go in for your deposition.
Committee Vice Chair Liz Cheney read those messages at the end of Tuesday's hearing from Cassidy Hutchinson, the former aide to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. CNN reported on Friday, and 2 sources familiar confirmed to NBC News that at least one of the messages presented in Tuesday's hearing was received by Cassidy Hutchinson herself. And we learned quite a lot from her testimony.
I remember looking at him and saying, "Rudy, could you explain what's happening on the 6th?" He had responded something to the effect of, "We're going to the Capitol. It's going to be great."
Where I remember Tony mentioning knives, guns in the form of pistols and rifles, bear spray, body armor, spears, and flagpoles. I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here. Let the people in. Take the effing mags away.
Mr. Cipollone said something to the effect of, "Please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. Keep in touch with me. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable." Tony described him as being irate. The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president. Take me up to the Capitol now." To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel. And when Mr. Ornato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
And I remember Pat saying to him something to the effect of, "The rioters have gotten to the Capitol, Mark. We need to go down and see the president now." And Mark looked up at him and said, "He doesn't want to do anything, Pat."
Did White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows ever indicate that he was interested in receiving a presidential pardon related to January 6th?
Mr. Meadows did seek that pardon. Yes, ma'am.
Look, there's no other way to describe it. It's explosive stuff. So far, no witnesses outside of Trump have disputed what may be the most consequential portions of Hutchinson's testimony. That Donald Trump knew the crowd gathered for his rally speech, that they were armed. In fact, he encouraged them to go to the Capitol anyway, and he wanted to join them. Of course, there has been some pushback on a few of the details, a source telling NBC News that both the limo driver and the head of Trump's security detail, Bobby Engel, are willing to testify under oath that the incident didn't happen the way Hutchinson was told. Another source says that Tony Ornato, the deputy chief of staff who Hutchinson says told her about the car incident, is also willing to say under oath that it did not happen. And both Meadows and Giuliani deny seeking pardons. But none of them, not a single one of them, have testified to this under oath just yet, which reminds us that there are plenty of people out there who we haven't heard from yet in these hearings. People like Hutchinson, who, her former boss, Mark Meadows, who the House voted to hold in contempt of Congress back in December. Obviously, he didn't cooperate with the Select Committee. And the committee this week subpoenaed former White House Chief Counsel Pat Cipollone, demanding the appeal for a deposition on July 6th. A lawyer familiar with the matter told NBC News that Cipollone will probably agree to a transcribed interview with the panel, which would be limited to specific topics to avoid executive privilege issues. Those negotiations are still ongoing. And there's Bobby Engel, Tony Ornato, and the limo driver in that alleged steering wheel incident. Engel and Ornato have spoken to the committee behind closed doors previously, but weren't asked about the alleged incident. No word yet on a formal invitation for them to return and testify under oath in front of the American people. And let's not forget former Vice President Mike Pence, who was the star of the entire hearing in June. Why haven't we heard from him under oath? All of this also raises the question of where the DOJ has been. I mean, that contempt of Congress vote against Mark Meadows I mentioned earlier, Attorney General Merrick Garland decided not to charge him with anything. Legal experts, both Democrats and Republicans, say enough evidence has been now revealed to charge Trump with a crime. But it's unclear if the DOJ is even moving in that direction. And now there's evidence of possible witness tampering. Look, to be clear, the DOJ and the Attorney General should act on evidence and not in reaction to public or even presidential pressure. But if there's a well-laid-out case here, as many prominent lawyers much smarter than me have said, it must be pursued. Because if an attempt to overturn an election and inciting an armed mob to further that goal goes unpunished in this country, then what's to protect our democracy in the future? Joining me now is Katie Phang, host of The Katie Phang Show right here on MSNBC and Peacock. She's also an MSNBC legal contributor. Also with us, David Jolly, who served as a Republican congressman but has since left the party. He is now chairman of the Serve America movement and an MSNBC political analyst. And Molly Jong-Fast, contributing writer for The Atlantic. She writes their Wait What newsletter and hosts their podcast, The New Abnormal, which I feel you have a lot to talk about on the next episode, Molly. Katie, I'd like to start with you. There's been criticism on the DOJ for its lack of action so far, even as we know they have their own probe. But several officials have told the New York Times that the committee did not share video or transcripts of Cassidy Hutchinson's taped interviews, leaving them blindsided as they watched Tuesday's hearing unfold. What do you make of this tension, this, gap between the committee and the Department of Justice, where these documents are not being shared and both are not working together?
When you hear media reports like that, Eamon, it's a little disheartening. You have to have a respect for the fact that there are parallel investigations that are going on. The 1-6 committee is a mission. Its mission is a fact-finding investigative body. It's really reporting to the American people what happened and transpired in the days and the weeks leading up to 1-6 and the days after 1-6, frankly. What ended up happening after the 1-6 event occurred? But the DOJ is kind of like, Eamon, it's like the Wizard of Oz, right? We want to be able to pull back the curtain and see exactly what the wizard is doing because we'd like to be able to have some reassurances that Merrick Garland is actually proactively going after everybody who is responsible for 1-6. But the reality is everybody's running out of patience. The kind of small glimmers of hope that we do have, Eamon, is the fact that somebody like John Eastman, Jeffrey Clark, there's been search warrants, we've had personal electronic devices seized, and we basically had phone records that have been looked into. But the more we don't hear from the DOJ, and respecting the fact that they obviously operate in some level of secrecy and privacy, the less encouraged we are, and we being the American public. I have definitely been relatively supportive of the DOJ, but I'm definitely a naysayer. I do think that you should have some transparency, and I think the lack of it is making people very impatient at this point. I'm
getting to the point where I'm surprised, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Katie, I'm surprised that the DOJ, I respect their privacy and the secrecy in which they operate, but I'm also surprised by the fact that they seem to be caught off guard or at least surprised by some of the revelations in the January 6th committee. I would feel much better if they were to come out and say, we actually knew about this, but here's the thing, and here's our take on why we haven't pursued this or why we haven't done it. But everything that is coming out of the 1-6 committee seems to catch the DOJ by surprise, and they're like, oh, we want them to give us this information. I'm like, you're the Department of Justice. You should be out there doing your own investigation, and you should be also unearthing just as damning, if not more damning evidence, because you probably have a lot more power to carry out investigations than the committee does.
Yeah, they certainly do. And the reality is that there could be things that are going on behind the scenes of which we are not privy to. But fundamentally, though, for example, right, you find out the stuff that the DOJ doesn't have. When you have these infamously not leaking institutions like that, why are we not hearing the positive leaks? Like, why are we not hearing the good things that are going on behind the scenes?
Exactly,
and I think that's what's making all of us throw our hands up in the air and say, come on, give us a little bit more, because we definitely do not, we're like hanging on the crumbs, right, Eamon? Like, we desperately want to know a little bit more. And that's the problem that we're facing right now.
David, as I mentioned, there is some pushback to Hutchinson's testimony, especially, the parts that were secondhand accounts. And she was very clear about what she witnessed herself and what was relayed to her. Some of this pushback is from anonymous sources. None of it, as I mentioned, is under oath. And on top of that, no one is directly disputing what at least I think is the big takeaway of her testimony, that Donald Trump knew and encouraged an armed crowd to march onto the Capitol. How credible to you is that pushback from the right on Hutchinson's testimony? Is it just an character assassination attempt?
Yeah, the pushback is worthless because it's anonymous and it's not under oath. I would say that the nation would benefit from a little bit of cross-examination. I realize this is not a court of law, but the way the committee is structured, we see all of these witnesses present their message, but it's rarely tried to be questioned or beaten back. And that's fine, because what has happened as a result, particularly with Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, is it has put a lot of people on the spot. It would not surprise me that when Liz Cheney mentioned, for instance, those text messages, they know who they came from. Yeah. And if it's a Mark Meadows, I bet Mark Meadows got another call from the committee saying, hey, are you sure you don't want to cooperate at this point? Cassidy Hutchinson laid down some very credible claims that must be answered to. The most important one is this Pat Cipollone knowledge of whether or not Donald Trump knew and was willing to let violence occur against the sitting vice president moments before he was to oversee the certification of the election. Right? She said Cipollone and Meadows agreed that Bush wanted violence and believed that Mike Pence was due harm. If that's the case, the most powerful part of Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony was to set the hook on Cipollone for the committee to subpoena him.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens if he does answer those questions after July 4th. I think all eyes are on him. And also, like I said, we haven't heard from Mark Meadows. We certainly haven't heard from Mike Pence. Molly, when it comes to possible witness tampering, and I think this is pretty interesting, the Washington Post is pointing out that the messages Cheney revealed are part of a pattern for Trump world. And I think all of us who have been following it for the last couple of years can see that. Trump and his allies basically use flattery to butter up potential witnesses in private while publicly blasting those who cross him in blunt and really kind of personal terms. And I should also note, a spokesperson for Mark Meadows said on Friday that no one from Meadows' camp himself or otherwise has ever attempted to intimidate or shape Ms. Hutchinson's testimony to the committee. But someone reportedly did, because Liz Cheney read them out, and along with at least other witnesses, according to her. What does this say to you about the bravery of Hutchinson and other witnesses who are defying Trump world to come forward?
Well, it's interesting because this is a time when a little bit of credibility would be a good thing, but no one in Trump world has any credibility. So no one wants to trust anything they say. And so this pushback, we've seen it before. There's nothing that Hutchinson said that isn't something we've seen in Trump world. And I mean, even like the very shocking stuff fit with a lot of the stuff we've heard before about Trump world. And I mean, it's striking to me that here's a 26-year-old aide who is braver than like even Republican senators, right? She's like one of the very few people who stood up to Trump and said, this is disgusting. I'm an American. I can't be involved in this. And think about all the powerful Republicans who, are much, much older and have many more resources who, just went along with Trump doing things that were unlawful and also immoral. And it's sort of amazing to me that the first person to say, no, this is not okay. I mean, there have been other women throughout the years who have said this is not okay. But she's been one of the very few people to stand up against Trump and say, what being an American is and taking a moral stand.
Let me, if I can, play for you, the man who preceded Mark Meadows as Trump's chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney. He was on CBS the day after Hutchinson's testimony. Watch what he said.
I've seen the same speech he's given dozens of times. I've seen him accused of trying to foment violence with no violence at all coming as a result. So I've been defending him. But after yesterday, when she testified that he knew that there were guns on property and that he still encouraged people to go down to the Capitol, that certainly changes my mind.
David, your thoughts on this? Mulvaney says he's changed his mind, but, are these hearings reaching other Trump insiders?
I doubt they're reaching Trump insiders. We'll see in a Republican primary where voters stay. But I think, Eamon, this is the singular issue that came from this week. It's not the lunging for the steering wheel or the ketchup on the wall. It's that on multiple occasions, Cassidy Hutchinson presented evidence, Mick Mulvaney has pointed to it, that Donald Trump was willing to escalate violence on the Capitol and perhaps on Mike Pence himself to stop certification of the election. That takes it right to the president's frame of mind and his willingness to use violence, the sitting president to use violence to prevent certification of an election. That's where all questions have to go to Merrick Garland when this J6 committee wraps up.